All right, so hopefully you got done with the document for the media presentation or 2 videos. So you just need to type in 10 facts per video and interpretation, 2 interpretations, 5 interpretations for each. And then we started talking about the revolution on the previous day's lesson, and we went over the causes and the moderate stage, and that's what the bell ringer was about. So today we'll talk about the radical part of the revolution because it will take quite a swing. At first, people were willing to have a constitutional monarchy. They were willing to have Louis there. So bringing him back to Paris wasn't exactly a punishment as much as they wanted him to provide leadership.
We're starting the notes right now.
Yes, we are.
Kind of a jump off.
But it soon started to spin out of control. As the cartoon portrays, it would become a bloodbath and perhaps bordering on organized anarchy. So let's look at some of the radicalism.
This 7. This 7 notes.
This is Unit 6. Yeah. So why did it become radical? Well, first, it got the common people involved. And as America's founding fathers discovered, the people can be quite emotional. And that was certainly true in Paris. Newspapers. There are a lot of complaints today about the media being political, but the truth is that it's always been political. Newspapers sprung up that back specific points of view or parties and published propaganda.
I think there shouldn't be news at all.
Yeah.
Was it fake propaganda?
Sometimes, yes, it was based on rumor, exaggerations.
Melodramas.
Yes, that's right.
Disgusting. Muckraking. Was it
Muckraking, yes. Political clubs would spring up that would get the average people involved. Political clubs. And of course, making things worse continually were fluctuating prices, especially on bread. The fact that the government couldn't seem to do anything about it and that there was no real leadership bringing Louis back, for instance, to Paris from Versailles didn't really seem to help, made the people even more frantic. Bread was just an easy way to take wheat and make it into something edible and then store it for a considerable period of time as long as it was kept dry.
Did they eat snails back then?
You mean the escargot? I'm sure they did. I doubt that that's something new.
Have you ever ate snails?
No, I have not.
Well, no.
But Louis ended up signing a number of compromises. But despite these compromises, people seem to get angrier and angrier.
Yeah, it seems like American trouble.
So, urged by his wife, he decides to flee in June of 1791. Unfortunately, even though they don't travel with a large entourage or anything like that, they are still obviously dressed like upper class. And before they reach the border, they're recognized and taken into custody.
Why don't they just randomly take him?
Well, it was believed that he was fleeing the country and that he was going to give vital information about France's military to, for instance, Marie Antoinette's brother, Leopold II of Austria. So they were going to go flee to one of the other monarchies and organize an army to invade France. That's what people were afraid of.
You think that would have worked? How do you made
I don't know. Probably not, because it's not like he was some kind of brilliant military mind, nor did he have any idea how the army was being restructured by the revolutionary government. So I don't think he would have been a lot of help at reinvading his own country. But all Europeans ended up taking a side in the conflict. Austria and Prussia became concerned and organized efforts, even without the help of Louis, to attack France. This encouraged others to eventually form what was known as the counter-revolution. Yes, monarchists or people that were just tired of the revolution and they wanted to stop it from spinning out of control. And that included people internationally like Edmund Burke, that was mentioned in the video. He wrote actively criticizing the revolution in France, warning that it was going to descend into anarchy, which is pretty much what happened. But of course, there were others like Thomas Paine in the United States who advocated in favor of the revolution. Thomas Jefferson was known for admiring it. So Austria and Prussia actively sent their armies into France. And by August of 1792, they were close to capturing Paris.
Who was fighting them?
The new government under the Assembly was now in charge of the army. And so they just continued to do the same thing. Draft people, raise money through taxes to give them supplies and so on. With the foreign military close, this, of course, caused Paris to go wild. People started attacking nobles again. Some Parisians attacked the king's palace, who was still alive at this point, and people started to assume there were spies everywhere. What's that again?
There was.
I don't know about that. I mean, there were definitely people opposed to the revolution, but they wanted to organize and protest against it. It's not like they were sabotaging it from the inside. Oops. And then, of course, there would be the Jacobins. They, as they mentioned in the video, were a mass political party that was opposed to the monarchy, but they were definitely leaders of the radical part of the revolution. They encouraged things like the September massacres. This is where mobs concerned about these foreign armies, they needed to go through and sweep Paris for any possible collaborators. And so the mobs ended up breaking into jails and assuming all the people in the jail were spies for the enemy, they ended up slaughtering them, sometimes throwing them off the sides of buildings or smashing their skulls against block walls.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like not possible to do.
In 1 week, the crowds had killed over 1,000 people.
Only 1,000?
That's a lot.
I figured it.
France in September was then declared a republic. And by the end of the year, of course, Louis was placed on trial. And of course, we know the end result of that. Now, the Jacobins did do some good things. They abolished slavery in the colonies. They repealed laws that gave preference to male inheritance, for instance, especially amongst the firstborn son. So they got rid of some of those older privileges from the feudal system. They did attempt to put a maximum price on grain. But then they did some not okay things, confiscating the property of their enemies, whether they were real or not. And then they did some kind of hokey things, like they scrapped the calendar because it was based on the church's idea of what a calendar should look like, and they made up their own, known as the revolutionary calendar.
They used the Augustus. No, like Augustus calendar.
Yeah, but it was, but remember that the church had set that up in order to fix the system with the leap days, for instance. So seeing that, they decided to make their own calendar instead. And so the year of this change would be year 1. And so you might think, well, that sounds terrible, but at least they got it out of their system, but that would be just the beginning. Then they would enter the Reign of Terror. This is when the Committee of Public Safety would be developed. Committee of Public Safety. Three people that would support this, 3 key revolutionary figures, would include the following. First would be Jean-Paul Marat.
He's dead.
They're all dead.
No, like during the time they were. Oh, he quit school. And now he's killed.
Yes.
Alright.
Jean-Paul would be Jean Paul, Paul, and then Marat, Marat.
Alright.
Marat believed that the revolution hadn't gone far enough. If there was any information, even without evidence, he would print it in his newspaper that someone was a traitor, someone was undermining the revolution. Yes, kind of like McCarthy. So he was willing to go after enemies even without any evidence. He despised the other countries for keeping their monarchies, and even Great Britain, because he believed keeping them even with a constitution is still evil. During the early days of the revolution, he had hid in the sewers, and so he developed a nasty skin infection, which means he had to spend most of his days in a medicinal bath. And that's where he was lying when a royalist, a supporter of monarchy named Charlotte Corday, asked to come see him, supposedly with some secret information.
What's his name?
Charlotte Corday.
Charlotte.
Yes.
Or.
Corday, Corday. Charlotte Corday, she didn't actually have secret information. She had a knife. And she ended up stabbing him to death in his bathtub.
No.
And then Georges Jacques Danton. You can just put Danton, Danton, as he was commonly called. He was extremely popular. And in fact, he was in charge of safety, specifically when some of these mobs were going around killing people. But he was also a brilliant politician. And so he knew if he went out and tried to stop them, they would either kill him or he wouldn't be able to stop them and he would look weak. So he just tried to pretend basically that he didn't notice any of this was going on. But when things calmed down again, he tried to moderate radicals in order to stop the revolution from becoming a joke and just becoming anarchy. But this would be Danton.
Danton.
Yeah, Danton.
What a lame name.
But Robespierre became suspicious of how moderate he was becoming. And so eventually he brought fake charges against Danton and had him guillotined. And that brings us to our last person, Robespierre. Maximilien Robespierre. And Robespierre is Robespierre. That's Robespierre. Maximilien Robespierre. Yeah.
Beautiful name.
Trained as an attorney, when he was younger, he had actually given an honorary speech to the king. And in the past, he was opposed to getting rid of the monarchy. He was opposed to the death penalty. But he quickly changed his mind once he became part of the committee. There, he too started to see enemies all around him, which is why he became suspicious when Danton started to back away from the radical nature of the revolution. In fact, he expanded the terror, as he called it, and he said that virtue or having principles don't have any weight behind them unless you use terror to enforce them. And so he actually became convinced that violence was necessary and hunting down enemies was part of the Committee of Public Safety's job. However, he then started to, even though he would start to see, for instance, kind of revolutionary revolts in other cities, as we saw in the video, he will start to see evidence from that he's absolutely justified in his approach and that he needs to keep guillotining people. And that's exactly what happens. And because where they have it set up, it becomes so bloody, they start moving the guillotine to different parts of Paris. There's a picture of Marat in his medicinal bath, dying, and a drawing of Louis being executed, his head being held up for the people to see. But in the end, it ends up being too much. And some of the other committee members start getting nervous after Danton was executed. And so they believe they might be next just for disagreeing with Robespierre. So they actually form a group in order to confront him, to ask him to specifically name what other enemies there are. And when he's not able to do that, he's shouted out of the assembly. After he flees, they then issue a warrant for his arrest. And the military, luckily, ends up supporting the National Assembly. So Robespierre flees to the Jacobin headquarters and hides out there. But then eventually the military comes in to get him. Now, we're not exactly sure what happened. Either he was trying to fire at some of the soldiers and he got pushed somehow, or he was trying to take his own life. But either way, he was unsuccessful because all he ended up doing was blowing the bottom half of his jaw off. So, bandaged very much so because he was bleeding profusely. The famed speaker, of course, couldn't talk anymore to defend himself in his quick trial. So after that, he ends up being dragged to the guillotine and executed as well. After this happens, there is a need to reform the government. And so the Directory is created. The Directory is created. The Directory is going to be a committee of executives, but unlike the previous government, is going to be controlled by the legislature. But it was unable to function properly, and even though it got rid of kind of the radical nature of the revolution, and offered a more stable, calm form of government. At the same time, it also wasn't able to change society any or make any further reforms. And so there was a cry out for leadership that would eventually occur that would bring Napoleon to power.